Now, I want to show you something that's been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years. Two of the most famous opening lines ever written. You've probably heard them before, maybe in church, maybe in a movie, maybe just floating around in culture. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Genesis and John. Beautiful, right? Poetic. The kind of stuff that sounds profound even if you're not religious. Most people read these lines and think, okay, nice creation story, moving on. But hold on, read them again. Slowly this time, because there's something deeply weird happening here that most people completely miss. See, at first glance, you'd think these verses are establishing when God came into existence, right? Like, here's where the story starts. Here's where God shows up. But that's not what they say, not even close. God's existence isn't established at the beginning. God is already there before the beginning. Look at John again. In the beginning was the Word. Not came to be, not appeared, was past tense, already existing, already present. And if you're thinking, okay, so what? That's just how religious texts talk. Then you're missing something absolutely massive. Because the beginning here doesn't mean the start of the story. It doesn't mean day one of some cosmic calendar. It means the beginning of everything. The beginning of time itself. Think about what that means for a second. If God existed before the beginning of time, then God exists outside of time, in a state where time doesn't exist, in a condition that you and I literally cannot imagine, because our brains don't have the software to process it. Now, you might be thinking this is just some interesting theological trivia. Ancient philosophy? Neat, but irrelevant. But here's the thing. This was a massive problem, like kept the greatest minds in history awake at night level problem. When St. Augustine pointed this out back in the 4th century, people immediately came at him. The pushback was swift and brutal. Okay, Augustine, you think you're so smart? Then answer me this. What was God doing before he created time? Was he just sitting around? Was he bored? Did he procrastinate for a bit? These weren't just smart-ass questions from internet trolls. These were serious theological challenges. If God existed before time, what was that existence like? What was happening? And Augustine's response? Absolutely brilliant. He said the question itself is nonsensical. Listen carefully to why. Action requires time. Any action, any event, any change, it all requires time to pass. You need a before and an after for anything to happen. You need duration. Even doing nothing requires time to pass. Even sitting still, you're experiencing seconds ticking by. So asking, what was God doing before time existed, is like asking, what's north of the North Pole, or what color is Tuesday, or how many bananas do you need to make orange juice? The question has no logical structure. It's not that we don't know the answer. It's that the question doesn't compute. God didn't exist in some endless duration before creation, twiddling his thumbs for an eternity before finally getting around to making stuff. That's still thinking in terms of time. God created space and time simultaneously. He made the beginning itself. The whole framework, the stage and the clock that sits on it. Now, here's where this stops being just a fun philosophical puzzle and becomes something much bigger. For centuries, literally centuries, scientists looked at all this theological talk about time having a beginning and said, yeah, that's cute, that's nice poetry, but it's wrong. Because the prevailing scientific theory wasn't just popular, it was considered settled science. It was called the steady-state universe. The idea was simple and elegant. The universe has always existed and always will. No beginning, no end. Just an eternal, infinite cosmos that's been here forever and will be here forever. It made sense. It felt right. It aligned with what we could observe. And it had something that religious texts didn't have. Mathematics, equations, peer review. And as long as that theory held, the Bible was wrong. Dead wrong. Genesis was mythology. John was poetry. Augustine was a smart guy playing word games with concepts he didn't understand. The whole theological framework, this idea of time having a beginning, of God existing outside time, was built on a foundation that science had supposedly demolished. Religion said one thing, science said another, and science had the better argument. For 2,000 years, this is how it stood. Science versus theology, reason versus faith. And on this particular question, science was winning. Until 1915, that's when everything changed. That's when a weird little Jewish guy with wild hair and a rebellious streak published a paper that would reshape our understanding of reality itself. His name was Albert Einstein, and the paper was on general relativity. Now, here's the funny part. Einstein himself believed in the steady-state universe. He wasn't trying to prove the Bible right. He wasn't doing apologetics. He was just following the mathematics wherever it led. And where it led was complicated. But then, in 1927, something extraordinary happened. A man named Georges Lemaitre, a Roman Catholic priest and a brilliant mathematician, was working through Einstein's equations, just doing the math, following the logic. And he discovered something absolutely bizarre, something that contradicted everything the scientific community believed. If general relativity was true, the universe must have a beginning. Not might have, not could have, must have. And here's the kicker. Since Einstein's theory showed that time itself wasn't this independent thing that just flowed along on its own, but was actually woven into the very fabric of space-time, a dimension like length, width, and height, that meant time had a beginning too. Time wasn't eternal. Do you see what just happened? A Catholic priest, using the equations of a Jewish physicist who didn't believe in a beginning, just mathematically proved what Genesis had been saying for 2,500 years. The scientific community absolutely lost their minds. Einstein himself rejected it. Other physicists dismissed it. They called it speculation. They said Lemaitre was letting his religious beliefs cloud his judgment. They weren't comfortable with a universe that had a beginning, and they said this explicitly. It sounded too religious, too much like Genesis, too much like creation. Science was supposed to have moved past all that. Science was supposed to be above ancient superstitions about beginnings and creation and cosmic clocks starting to tick. But Lemaitre didn't back down. This wasn't about defending his faith. It was about following the mathematics. The equations didn't care about anyone's theological preferences. They said what they said. And then, in 1929, something happened that changed everything forever. An American astronomer named Edwin Hubble was looking through his telescope at distant galaxies, and he noticed something weird, something nobody expected. The galaxies were moving, all of them moving away from us. And not just moving, accelerating. The universe was expanding. And if the universe is expanding now, then if you run the clock backwards, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, until you reach a point where all of space, all of matter, all of energy, all of time itself was compressed into a single point. A beginning. Hubble had just provided observational evidence for what Lemaitre predicted. The steady-state universe was dead. The universe had a beginning. Time had a beginning. The Bible was right. Augustine was right. The ancient Jewish scribes were right. The theory that Lemaitre discovered hidden in Einstein's equations, the theory that Hubble proved with his telescope, the theory that killed the steady-state model and forced science to accept that the universe and time itself had a beginning, we call it the Big Bang Theory. Yes, that Big Bang. The same one you've heard about your whole life. So here's what I want you to sit with for a moment. The Bible doesn't make scientific claims. It's not a physics textbook. It's not trying to give you the mathematical formulation of space-time curvature. It makes philosophical and theological claims about the nature of reality, existence, and God. But it is extremely funny. And by funny, I mean profoundly striking, that it took the brightest minds in science 2,500 years to catch up with a religious text written by poor Jewish scribes who had never heard of physics, never seen a telescope, never solved a differential equation. They got there first. Not through experiments, not through mathematics, not through the scientific method. Through theology, through wrestling with the nature of God, through asking impossibly hard questions about existence and time and beginnings. And maybe, just maybe, That tells us something important about the limits of dismissing ancient wisdom as primitive superstition. About the arrogance of assuming that scientific progress always moves us away from religious truth rather than sometimes toward it. The scribes knew something profound. Augustine knew. Aquinas knew. Boethius knew. They couldn't prove it with telescopes or equations, but they understood something fundamental about the nature of reality that science would take millennia to confirm. Einstein gave us the theory. Hubble gave us the proof. But Genesis gave us the truth first, and it did it with 10 words. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Not once upon a time, not a long time ago. In the beginning, at the start of time itself, at the moment when the clock started ticking, when reality came into being, when there was nothing, and then, suddenly, spectacularly, mysteriously, there was everything. Science finally learned to read what the ancient text had been saying all along, and the priest who showed them how? He used their own equations to do it. And at the beginning was the Word, and 25 centuries later, science finally learned to read it. Funny how that works, isn't it?